I don't know.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So initially we had the story of Moses as the initial plan, but I realized that I forgot about Yusuf alayhi salam. So we're actually going to go over that story instead. I promise next time inshallah we'll do Musa alayhi salam. But you're going to learn a lot from Yusuf alayhi salam. So Yusuf alayhi salam, known as Joseph, his story is very unique. And just for those who might be joining us for the first time, most of us know these stories. The intention is actually to reflect. The intention for those who have been with us, you know that we try to draw lessons. Right? Because God doesn't tell us stories for the sake of just storytelling. Right? Obviously, it tells us our history. But also it's for us to find ourselves in these stories. So the surah starts, and I'm not going to be reading every single ayah because, mashallah, it's very long surah, but I want to start with the statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes when He says, نَحْنُ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ أَحْسَنَ الْقَصَصِ بِمَا أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, before He tells us the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, Joseph, He says, we tell you the best of stories. And the stories are told through the revelation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that we are telling you the best of stories through the revelation. Now, you look at the revelation, obviously it took place in Mecca, the original place where the Prophet started calling his own people, and continued into Medina, where he ended up migrating with his followers. And that's where he died. You will look at the stories that were told to him in Mecca, they were actually to strengthen him and his followers because he was having a hard time. He was having a difficult time. The most difficult time for him, it was during the initial stage of calling people to Islam. They were tortured, they were kicked out of their homes. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the stories that actually the Prophet was told is the story of Yusuf. So I want for us to think about this. Allah, obviously we know when He reveals a surah or an ayah, He doesn't just reveal it for the sake of revelation. We know this. He reveals it so people during that time can relate to it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had the option of revealing the entire Quran in one shot, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose not to because He wants, first of all, to understand where these stories are coming from, but also for every ruling, every incident that He addresses, it's for us to reflect on it until the day of judgment. So He says, we tell you the best of stories. And let's look at how Yusuf alayhi salam starts by telling his dream to his father. إِذْ قَالَ يُوسُفُ لِأَبِيهِ يَا أَبَتِي. So Yusuf alayhi salam, the first thing that actually we learn. So we know Yusuf's father is what? Is a what? Is a normal person? A regular guy? He was a prophet, right? So Yusuf's father was a prophet, right? Yaqub alayhi salam, we know that the lineage of Ibrahim alayhi salam, he had Ismail, Ishmael, and Isaac, Ishaq, and all the prophets other than Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, those who came from Ishaq, all the way down, they were all the other prophets, and then from Ismail we only had Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Yusuf tells his father about a dream, right? But the way he addresses him, he says, Ya abati. The first thing is the etiquette of how we speak to our parents, right? And the relationship and how strong the relationship Yusuf alayhi salam had with his father, right? He could have gone to anyone to tell about his dream. A lot of times what do? We tell our friends, right? Sometimes we tell everybody. And our parents are not even the last ones to be told. We try to actually not to tell them. But look at Yusuf and the relationship that he had with his father. He says, Ya abati, and he tells him what he sees in the dream. He says, Ya abati, inni ra'aytu ahada ashara kawkaban wa shamsa wal qamara ra'aytuhum li sajidin. Very brief dream in one sentence. He says, he saw how many stars? How many stars? In addition to the moon and the sun, how many? 11, right? Kawakib, 11. That's the number of what? For those who know the story, that's the number of his brothers, right? His siblings, his brothers, right? So this is, I want you to know this. This is what Yusuf does. He goes to his father and he says, I see this dream, right? And then we have an entire story of years and years, right? Decades before that dream gets fulfilled. Again, another lesson, because when does the dream gets fulfilled? Midway in the story? Is it midway in the surah or towards the end of the surah? When does that dream come true? When does it come true? Midway in the surah or towards the end? Towards the end. Towards the end, right? A lot of us, we sometimes, I'm not talking about dreams as we go to sleep. A lot of us, we make dua, right? We supplicate, we ask Allah for something. When do we want it to be fulfilled? Yesterday, right? Yesterday. I asked today, I want it to be fulfilled yesterday. Yaqub tells his son, right? After his son told him this, the first thing he tells him, what does he tell him? Ya bunayya, la taqsus ru'yaka ala ikhwatika, فَيَكِيدُ لَكَ كَيْدًا. The first thing, he said, look, I have a dream, 11 stars, the sun and the moon prostrating to me. That sounds like a good dream. And what's the first thing that his father says? Do not tell your siblings about this dream. Don't. So they may not plot against you. Now, this is another lesson. Jealousy, a lot of times we have this tendency of thinking jealousy comes from people from outside, right? I don't want you guys to fear your family members. But the Prophet ﷺ actually even tells us, when you have something that you're planning, one thing that actually helps you execute it is by just keeping it low, right? Not going and telling everyone about it. Some of us, we just have an idea. CNN knows about it, Fox News knows about it, like everybody knows about it. And then what do we say? Man, I couldn't execute it. If you want to execute something, just try to only tell people that will help you in the execution. Yusuf alayhi salam, the only one so far who knew about the dream is who? His father, right? And he told him, he said, do not tell your siblings, right? And then we will learn that there is actually a jealousy, right, between the siblings, right? They felt that Yaqub favored Yusuf over them, right? We will come to that point. So the first thing that he tells his son, he says, do not tell your dream to your siblings. Now here's the thing. Remember, Yaqub is a prophet, right? So for him, and obviously he doesn't tell him exactly what's going to happen, but I want to pause here. The Prophet ﷺ told us, and interesting enough, even psychology later actually confirmed that. He said there are 3 types of dreams. When you have a dream, it's mostly one of the 3. One, which is obviously all of us can relate to. Let's say that something happened to you, or you're thinking about something, right? You're planning for something, you're excited, you're thinking about going on this vacation. Guess what? In the dream, you end up going on the vacation, right? Or something traumatic happened to you, or something exciting happened to you, you dream about it again. You're anxious about something, so your subconscious kicks in during the sleep, and it comes in a form of a dream. The Prophet ﷺ said that is actually one of the things that happens to us. The second one, he said, it's something, the bad dreams, right? And he says, those, make sure that you do not tell people about it. He says, those are from shaitan. Those are not dreams to be told. These are not dreams to be entertained. When you have a bad dream, do not entertain. Don't try to get interpretation for it. He said, if you see a bad dream, just forget about it. Right? He said, and the third one is something that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's exactly what happened with Yusuf alayhi salam. His father told him, do not tell this dream to your siblings. But before we move on, who also had a dream, and we spoke about him actually last time, who had a dream and he knew it was a revelation from Allah? His father, Ibrahim, right? Because Abraham, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to him through the dream that he was slaughtering his son, right? And obviously he knew that it was a revelation, that was a message from God, right? Same thing for Yusuf, right? Joseph, his father later told him that this is a promise from Allah. He says, وَكَذَلِكَ يَجْتَبِيكَ رَبُّكَ وَيُعَلِّمُكَ مِنْ تَأْوِيلِ الْأَحَادِيثِ وَيُتِمُّ نِعْمَتَهُ عَلَيْكَ وَعَلَى آلِ يَعْقُوبَ كَمَا أَتَمَّهَا عَلَى أَبَوَيْكَ مِنْ قَبْلُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَإِسْحَاقَ إِنَّ رَبَّكَ عَلِيمٌ حَكِيمٌ. So here he tells his son that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to teach you the interpretation of dreams. And that obviously those who actually we know the prophets, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, part of their revelation is their ability to have that ability to interpret dreams, right? So he was giving him this glad tidings. And I want you to listen to this. Yaqub here, he's telling his son that Allah is going to fulfill his blessings upon you, okay? I want you to remember this, okay? So here's a son who is favored by his father. He's a son of a prophet. And then his father, who's a prophet, is telling him that you also will be a prophet, right? But he uses the language that Yusuf can understand as a child, right? He didn't say, you are going to be a prophet, but he gives him the qualities of a prophet. He says, God will, fulfill the blessings upon you, after he told him to not tell your siblings. And here's the thing. As we continue into the story, the first thing that happens to Yusuf after that was not something promising. It didn't sound like he was on track of becoming a prophet, right? This is another thing for us to learn about. There are a lot of things that God promises us, right, if we stick to that straight path. But sometimes we feel that we are the ones who decide how things have to play out. And if they don't play out the way that we want, we start doubting God. Well, it doesn't look like I'm going to be, quote unquote. Yusuf could have been thinking, like in the depth of the well, right? How am I going to be a prophet from this position, right? I'm seeing death. He could have thought of it that way, right? But look, he had to go through everything that he had to go through, and God ended up fulfilling the promise, the promise. And the events had to happen that way. So the first thing, we know that the siblings, they got together, right? The older siblings, they got together, and they had to justify why they have to get rid of Yusuf. This is one of the biggest mistakes that we make. Before we make a mistake, what do? We make up excuses, right? Something that justifies why we are going to harm this person or that person, right? They deserved it. They brought them to themselves, right? They asked for it, right? That's exactly what the siblings of Yusuf said, right? Listen to the reason they said. They said Yusuf and his brother, Benjamin is actually the younger brother, said they are more beloved to our father, and we are a group of power. We are the strength for our father, meaning our father should rely on us. Therefore, he should love us more, right? But what he's doing, instead he's favoring our brother Yusuf and his brother, the younger one, over us. It's not fair. We're not liking it. So you know what? We need to get rid of Yusuf, right? Here's another thing. They said, you know what? Let's kill him, and then we become good people, right? Isn't it interesting sometimes, right? So here's the thing. We list all the excuses why we have the right to do something, right? Whether harming somebody or violating the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we say, yeah, when I'm done, right? When I fulfill my desires, and everything is done, I will become a righteous person, right? It's like we paved the way for ourselves. Allah is telling us this story so we can actually reflect. And He's showing us all the wrong things that these siblings, decided to do. So they have decided that's it. We have to get rid of Yusuf, right? One of them says, don't kill him. He said, "ألقوه في غيابة الجب." You know what? You want to get rid of him, right? Let's not kill him. Let's get rid of him in a way that we know somebody will pick him up so we don't feel as guilty, right? Because killing someone is a big sin, a major sin. So he's not saying, you know what, let's just not go ahead. He's just like, let's do it in a milder way, right? Again, think about it. Sometimes, we have that good, friend of ours, like, yeah, we'll do it, but not as bad, right? Still, the wrong is wrong, right? But here's the thing. Some of us will think about this. So, fine, the father, apparently, the children could pick on the fact that the father was favoring 2 over the 10, right? Because Benjamin makes the 11, right? So here's the father favoring Yusuf and his younger brother. But why does Yusuf have to pay the price? Isn't it the father's fault? Because the father is the one who's actually playing favorism here, right? It's not Yusuf's fault. Also, it's not fair because Yusuf is very young. Like, what did he do? Like, for him to deserve? Because sometimes we think about it, right? We're like, Yusuf was really young when they try to get rid of him, right? That's not fair. God should have stopped that, right? But here's the thing. Think about it this way. Yusuf was young enough that it had to be that time for them to put him in the well, because if they put him at a much older age, the facial features would not have much changed. And they would have recognized him when, later they're going to meet him, right? So it was actually the time that was meant to be the time. Otherwise, it would not have worked, right? So Yusuf had to be put in the well, and they were old enough that he would recognize them, right? Because you get to a certain facial features, it doesn't matter how old you get, they're there, right? You can pick on them. But when you're much younger, a lot of changes happen. So Yusuf had to be young for them to put him in the well. Now, with Jub here, a lot of scholars, they say it was a dry well. Now, why do you think they put him in a dry well? A lot of scholars say it was dry because only travelers will try to fetch water from that well, because locals, they know it's dry. They wouldn't go to fetch water, right? Again, think about it. If they put him in just any well, any local could have picked him up and brought him back home. But Yusuf had to leave that place so he can later do what? Save humanity in that location. So you have to understand, sometimes we go through things that seem to be like almost life-ending, right? And they seem unfair, right? And all these negative feelings. But actually, that is meant to happen to you because you have a greater call at a later time. That not only will it save you, but it will actually save others. And that's exactly the journey that Yusuf had to go through. It was meant to happen that way. Because if anything, throughout the story, if anything did not happen the way that it happened, the story would not have ended the way that it ended. Right? Umar radiallahu anhu, the companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this is a life lesson. He said, I don't get upset with how things play out, good or bad. Because he said, in explanation, in his eyes, something might look good or it might look bad, but he doesn't know where goodness lays. How many of us know the story of the farmer, right? He saw the bird with the broken wing. What did he do? And he had to go to work. So he found a place where it was muddy. So he's like, let me put the bird, right, in that mud so the bird doesn't move, so I can, when I come back, I will fix its wing, right? So again, on the surface, that's not good for the bird, right? You just kind of get them stuck in the mud, right? Somebody who throws you into the mud, is that a good thing? It's not a good thing, right? And of course, unfortunately for the bird, the dog saw the bird and picked it up from the mud. What do you think happened to the bird? It was lunch, right? Again, on the surface, somebody just put you in the mud. That's not good. On the surface, somebody just pulled you out of the mud, that's good. But in reality, the one who put you in the mud intended actually to come later and fix your wing. Those, or the one who pulled you out of the mud, you were a meal. Okay? So Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, he doesn't really get bothered by how things play out because he doesn't have enough wisdom to understand the reason why things happen. So he said, I don't get bothered, whether it's good or bad. So Yusuf alayhi salam, every single event that we're going to talk about, it was not a good thing, right? So now they decided that, okay, fine, we're not going to kill him, okay? We'll just put him in the well, and they did. Now the interesting thing, when they decided to do that, they went to their father, right? To ask for permission to take Yusuf with them, okay? And the father, he actually literally tells them how to lie, unintentionally, right? He says, "Inni akhafu an tadhhabu bihi," right? I'm fearful that you will take him, and I'm concerned that the wolf would eat him, right? By that time, they didn't say we're going to come back to our father and lie and say the wolf ate him, right? They just decided they're going to put him in the well. But the father unintentionally, right, told him the rest of the plot, right? That, listen, I'm afraid that the wolf is going to eat him. And that's exactly what they did, right? They went, took their brother out, obviously dropped him in the well, and they faked the blood, and they went back to their father, and they said, we went to play, and we left our brother next to, our mata, and the wolf came and ate him, right? Of course, the plot was not well planned because the shirt was not torn, it only had blood. I mean, that wolf was really good. He just pulled him out. He did not do anything to the clothing, right? And obviously the father was very, very saddened by the reality of what, his sons did to his son Yusuf, right? Now, we know after that, a caravan passed by, right? And one of them went again to fetch water, thinking that is water. Again, some scholars say there was actually water. Some others say it didn't have water because it's the only way that locals would not have, found out about Yusuf being in the well. The point is, it was outsiders who pulled Yusuf out. Now, some of us would say, okay, they just pulled him out. They have to be nice enough to do what? To ask, where do you live? We'll take you back home, right? And that's exactly what they did, right? Right? No. See how things could have happened differently? But Allah allowed for them to happen, again, on the surface, in the worst way possible. Again, they could have said, hey, listen, we are merchants. Why don't we add him to our caravan? He becomes one of us. He learns from us, and he becomes a merchant himself. Did that happen? No. Right? Said, فَشَرَوْهُ بِثَمَنٍ بَخْسٍ. They sold him actually for a very, very low price. And Allah obviously was fully aware. Allah tells us here, He just inserts Himself to say, no. All of these were happening under the watch of God. God knew exactly what's happening. God allowed for that to happen because it had to happen. Now we're like, okay, fine. Things should look different for him, right? I mean, and by the way, Yusuf, we know, the Prophet ﷺ tells us about the beauty of Yusuf, right? In a hadith, he says, Yusuf has half the beauty. Like, when you look in the mirror and you say, I'm good looking, trust me, you're nothing compared to Yusuf, right? He had that. He was beloved by his father. He had it all looking up, but again, life was just not going the way that it should, right? And I want you to think about this. As events are unfolding, Yusuf, remember what he was promised by his father? You are going to be a prophet. Does it look like he's becoming a prophet? That journey looks nothing like him becoming a prophet, right? And instead of getting better, what happens? It gets worse, right? Now he is the wife of one of the ministers, right? And they bought him. They had two options. One option, they adopt him to become their son. The other option is he becomes a slave, right? This is what she said, right? This is what she said. She said either we benefit from him, meaning he becomes a servant, a slave, right? Or he becomes our son. They did not take him as a son. Yusuf becomes a what? A slave. he becomes a servant, right? Now, listen to this. There was somebody who had almost similar circumstances, right? Can somebody, and actually his story is the next one we're going to be talking about. Does anyone remember a prophet who was actually adopted by his enemy? Musa, right? Moses was actually adopted by the wife of the Pharaoh, right? You see how these two prophets kind of like were forced out of their homes, right? One way or another. One becomes a servant or a slave, the other one is an adopted son, right? But they both end up becoming prophets, meaning we do not decide how life is going to unfold. And the ending could exactly be the same, but Allah intends for one to take one path and another takes another. And this is also a lesson for us. Don't look at somebody's path and see them achieving certain things and say, that's the only path to that thing. No, that's not the only path. And actually the Prophet ﷺ even speaking about the experience that his companions actually went through. One person, mashallah, like his strength was in salah. And that's how they saw themselves getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Obviously they fast, they do all of that, but also they try to do more of prayers. One, their strength was fasting, right? So in life, always keep an open mind and understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open so many doors for you, whether it's as you're going through difficulty or even acts of worship. Do not think that I have to follow in the footsteps of the person in front of me, other than the Prophet obviously, right? So Yusuf becomes a slave, right? And he lives a life of slavery. Now, do things get better for him? No, they don't. They get even worse, right? Now he's in the house, and unfortunately, the wife of the minister, she's the one who comes upon him. Long story short, even though she's the one who came to Joseph Yusuf and he rejected her, what happens? What is he accused of? Exactly the opposite, right? He's being accused that he's the one who attacked her, not the other way around. And the interesting part, I want to stop here. Yusuf alayhi salam, when this lady came to him, right? And for the sake of keeping it family oriented, he had so many reasons to do that which is forbidden. First of all, was he local? Was that his town? No one knew him, right? So if he did something wrong, would somebody say, oh, you're the son of so or so, and right? Was he a free person that time or a slave? He was a slave. Remember, he was a slave, right? The woman who came to him, she was pretty much his owner, right? She owned him, right? So pretty much he had to do everything that she does ask him, right? Was he very old or was he young? He was young, right? So pretty much, and he was beautiful. Like Yusuf, actually, the word beauty usually goes for women and handsome. Actually, he was beautiful. Like all the scholars, when they describe it, they say he was beautiful. Like the word beauty actually is used with Yusuf alayhi salam. So he had all the excuses, right, to do that and say, hey, listen, it's out of my control, right? But he actually, the one thing that actually kept him from doing it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the one thing that I always remind the parents. Don't raise the kids to fear you. Raise them to be conscious of God, because they will be put in positions and situations where you're not going to be there. And it's really just them and God, right? But a lot of parents with good intention, when they raise their kids, the kids are fearing more the parents than anything. If the parents are not there, it's a free pass. Do whatever you want. That's not the right way to raise kids. Kids, they have to be conscious of God, meaning it doesn't matter who I'm dealing with, it doesn't matter what situation I'm in, it doesn't matter what place I'm at. It's me, my conscience, as I'm thinking of God. And that's how Yusuf alayhi salam was raised. He was conscious. Actually, ulama, they say, one of the interpretations or the explanations of this ayah, because it says he saw Burhan Rabbi, he saw the evidence that God showed him, meaning a reminder. Some of them said he actually imagined his own father in front of him, so he stopped. Others, they have different interpretations for it, but the point is he stopped himself. Now, do you think that was the end of it? apparently the husband was coming, right? The husband was coming, and then she played the victim, right? She played the victim. She turned everything on, the fact that, he was running away from her, and then it turned that she presented like she was the one who was running. And we know, we'll take questions later. And we know, even though the evidence, because somebody from her family, by the way, the mic is attacking me. Somebody from her family, by the way, became the judge, right? And he said this. Because again, some of us would say, well, I have the evidence, right? And when you have the evidence, you think justice will be served, right? And Yusuf actually had the evidence supporting his case. So somebody from her family said, okay, if his clothing, right, were torn from the front, that means he was attacking her. And if they were torn from the back, that means she was running after him and she was pulling him. The clothes were torn from where? The front or the back? The back. Evidence. But do you think she was called out on it? No. Now, before he was sent to prison, rumors started spreading, right? How could she, as a master, be the one approaching her slave, right? And look at what she did. So, Niswa fi Medina, right? Women in the city started talking. So, how could she, right? She's the owner, and how could she, approach a slave and all that? So what she did, she was very slick. She invited them, right? And she gave them fruits, and she gave them knives, right? Obviously, the knives were for them to cut the fruits, right? Or so it seemed. She had a different intention, right? And then what she did, in the middle of that, what does she do? What does she tell Yusuf to do? To walk in. What do they do when they see him? Now, they didn't cut their hands, okay? They cut their hands if you say qata'na. Qata'na is what? It's repetitive cutting. All right? You say qata'a meaning to cut, right? Qata'a means, right, it shows you the intensity of it. I mean, they didn't just, think about it this way. When you have a knife, right? I hope you're all going to react the same way. Let's say you're cutting apples, right? And you're cutting through and the knife makes its way through and you cut your finger. What's the first reaction you do? Ow, you drop it, right? The first cut. No. These ladies are like, I mean, and subhanAllah, by the way, the Quran, when it tells you that, right? Allah doesn't just put words in the Quran. He doesn't just put words for the sake of sounding. No. He puts the exact words to describe the exact events. Those ladies, they were so amazed by the beauty of Yusuf that their minds were not present. They were not feeling the pain. فَأَكْبَرْنَهُ. They're like, this is impossible that this is a human being, right? They said, it's impossible, right? And they said, هَذَا مَلَكٌ كَرِيمٌ. They said, this is a noble and honorable angel. They said, this person cannot be from amongst our species. This person is, and then she sees the moment. قَالَتْ فَذَلِكُمُ الَّذِي لُمْتُنَّنِي فِيهِ. She said, that's what you blamed me for. It's like, you think it was easy for me? I lived with him, right? For you, you just saw him for how many minutes? Like he just walked in, right? And by the way, this is not to justify, but this is a lesson, which most of us do not even reflect on this lesson, right? Again, I'm going to use Eric. I always use you, Eric. I love you. This, by the way, happens a lot. I'm walking by, I see Eric doing something that, right, is not right. What do? I start judging him. I start saying, how could he, right? And we do that. Alhamdulillah, we're really good at this, right? I don't mean alhamdulillah in a good way. Like, it's really unfortunate. I judge him, and I even decide that he's going to go to hellfire, right? Eric is fun, isn't it? I have your permission, right, to pick on him? Okay, first I was like, let's go. The problem is, first of all, I do not know the entire story. Secondly, I do not know. Maybe if I was in his shoes, I would have done worse than him. Don't judge people. when you see someone doing something wrong, try to approach them in a loving way and say, and a lot of times I always say this, before you try to advise anyone, get to know them first. Let's say I do not know Eric, right? And I see him, let's say, doing something that I know is wrong. The first thing, if I really intend to help him, I introduce myself. And I start asking how he's doing, start learning a little bit about him. So at least I can get enough information, first of all, to show him that I care. Secondly, maybe I might pick on something that tells me, again, not to justify, but to at least know how to approach the struggle that he is going through, right? But for us, from Wallahi, I know a lot of people. And that's why subhanAllah, I learned my lesson in life. When you see someone doing something, try your best not to judge. Because, and this is the Prophet says, if you do that, you might go through the same and you might end up doing the same. Allah might have ibtila, Allah might test you exactly the same way. And you will find yourself doing exactly what the other person is doing or even worse. Again, try to advise, try to, tell them maybe you didn't mean it this way, but do not try, especially to tell someone, oh, you're going to hellfire. Again, this is not to justify what she did, but this just tells you, again, Allah could have skipped this whole part. Right? Because if you think about it, that part didn't add much to the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. He was going to go to prison anyway, right? But Allah mentioned that to show you. You don't feel what people are feeling, so at the least you can do, don't judge them. Again, what is wrong, but try to be considerate. Try to have empathy when you're dealing with others, right? So obviously now Yusuf is not dealing only with one woman now. He's dealing with a number of them, right? And for him, she said, if he doesn't listen to me, then he is going to be punished. And he made a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, he said, Ya Allah, sijn, prison, is a better option for me, is more beloved to me than what they are trying to ask me to do. So let's look at the second part before we go to the first one. For him, he said, I don't care about the worldly consequences, right? Because for me, I know what they're calling me to, it's haram. So I would rather deal with anything knowing that I'm pleasing God, right? Including going to prison, right? So for us, a lot of times, right? And we see this, especially, nowadays, when you tell someone, this thing is, it's wrong, it's not pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's like, well, I don't have a choice, right? Yusuf alayhi salam, he had two options. One, doing what he was told to do. The other one is going to prison. But here's one thing actually we have to stop at. We don't have a strong hadith to support this, but the scholars, they say, had Yusuf made a different dua, right? Had he made a different dua, meaning had he said, oh God, save me and stop, instead of saying, I would rather go to prison, he might have not gone to prison. Again, remember, everything happens for a reason. But when you ask God, don't ask him for something that puts you through difficulty. Don't. Always ask God of the best of the best. And don't say, and this is one of the mistakes that we make, well, God cannot fulfill that. That's too big for God. No. Ask for the best. God help me. God protect me. God give me strength. Whatever you're asking for, don't say, again, we have this very, very weak. Yusuf actually, again, I don't want you to count on this as a hadith. I'm just telling this for the sake of maybe explaining, right? Yusuf said, oh God, why did you allow them to put me in prison? He said, well, you asked for it, right? And I fulfilled you asked. You said, prison is more beloved to me, so prison was an option that you wanted. Again, we don't have a strong hadith to support this, but the idea is, when you ask God, ask him for the best. Don't say God cannot save me or God cannot help me. Maybe the help may not come the way that you want it, but have yaqeen, have certainty that God will help me in the best way that he sees fit. And for me is to know that is what is best for me. Sometimes we do not comprehend it, but God will give you what is best for you. And sometimes we will see it. And by the way, when we cover the story of Musa, it tells us how actually life or events in life play out. I don't want to get ahead of it, but it's actually one of the favorite stories that I actually have, because really it gave me, personally, it gave me greater perspective on life and how sometimes things happen. God show you a sign, sometimes he doesn't show you a sign. Sometimes things happen, you're not even aware of it, and at the end, You are the one who benefits, from it. So here Yusuf, and again, just for the sake of time, we're not going to read all the ayahs. Yusuf is sent to prison, right? So he finds himself in prison now. Obviously, unjustly. The evidence proved his innocence, but hey, it's the ruler, right? Could God have saved him? Again, sometimes things happen and you're like, where is God? No, God is there. And remember, God keeps reminding us, right? Every now and then he inserts himself and says, yes, I'm watching. Yes, I'm aware. Yes, I know. Yes, I'm allowing it to happen. So Yusuf is in prison now. And this is one of the things. A lot of us, we speak about being patient, right? And we say, well, I'm going through this and I'm patient. We don't even know what it means to be patient. Patient is the attitude that you have as you're going through things, right? As you're going through that difficulty, right? Some people say, I'm patient. Every time you see them, they're complaining. They say, how you doing? Don't start me, man. Things are not looking good. And like, yeah, but I'm patient, right? They complain for an hour, and they say, yeah, but you know what? I'm patient. I'm like, what? Again, sometimes, it's good to tell somebody, especially if they can help you, but I'm talking about someone who's like just constantly complaining about life, right? And constantly just finding something to complain about, and they say, you know what? Alhamdulillah, praise be to God. I'm like, you just wasted an hour complaining. So Yusuf, right, his attitude as he was in prison, he had the best attitude. How do we know? When the two people who were in prison with him, they each had their own dream. They went back and they praised him about his character. That's the first thing they did, right? Before they asked him for the interpretation, they praised him for what they have known him for, right? So that's something that Yusuf did not tell them, hey, did you have a dream? I'm a good person. Let me give you the interpretation. No. They knew who Yusuf is through the way that he lived. And Yusuf, when they told him the dreams, and we're going to talk about those dreams. Remember, Yusuf was a believer. Okay, Yusuf was a believer, right? Even though he went through everything, he was a believer. He did not, his faith was not shaken. Now again, he was in prison, right? But for him, he understood that life is short. He did not allow for prison to distract him. Now these two individuals asked him about their dreams, right? Did he tell them the interpretation of the dreams? He did, right? But did he do it right away after they told him the dreams? No. What did he do? Can somebody tell us what did he do before he told them their interpretation? Can somebody tell us? What did he do before he told them the meaning of their dreams? And we know each one came to be true, right? But what did he do right before he told them what their dreams meant? متفرق, yes. Right? خير أم الله الواحد القهار. He made da'wah. He told them about God. Now, when we are going through difficulties, let's be honest, how many of us, right, we think about telling people about God? Let's be honest, right? We're struggling to keep faith in God, right? For him, not only that he had the faith, but he seizes the moment. He's in prison. He is still in his prison cell, right? And he tells them, are multiple gods, divided gods, better, or the one God who created all of us is better? He's telling them about the oneness of God in prison, right? And then he tells them, he says, well, one of you will be serving your master, meaning you're going to be free, right? You're going to be serving your master, and the other one, you will be killed, right? And the birds will eat. Because one of them says, I'm seeing myself, serving a khamr, and the other one says, I'm seeing there's bread on top of my head, and the birds are pecking on it, right? The birds are eating from my head. He said, for the one who had the bread dream, he said, you're going to be killed, meaning you're going to be executed. That's the final ruling they're going to have. And the other one said, you are going to be set free, right? And then Yusuf tells the one who was going to be set free, right? He wants to seize the moment, right? He says, what did he ask him? What's the favor he asked him?
mention me to your Lord.
To your Lord, right? Mention me to your master, right? Here, because the Rabb here is a master too. He told him, listen, you're going to be set free, so can you please mention my story to your master, right? The ulama, they say his master was a person of position, right? The master of the person who is going to be freed has a position, he has a word with the king, right? فَأَنْسَاهُ الشَّيْطَانُ ذِكْرَ رَبِّهِ. We have actually two explanations for this one. The ulama, they say, because Yusuf here, for a moment, forgot that who should he be asking for his freedom? Who should he ask? Allah, right? Right? We are, as humans, we are just tools, right? We are just tools. But Yusuf, some scholars, they say he had a moment of weakness. So instead of asking God, right, our creator, for his freedom, he asked a human being for his freedom. So Shaitan made him forget Allah, right? Another interpretation is that the person who was freed, Shaitan made him forget, right? As soon as he was out, he was ready to celebrate. It's like, who's Yusuf? He forgot about Yusuf in prison. فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ, right? So Yusuf, right, after again calling them to worship one God, right? He preached to them. I mean, obviously one was killed and the other one was freed. And then he asked, he said, please tell your master, to help me. What happens? He's forgotten about. Again, the word bid'ah, it's from 3 to 9 years. Not only that he stayed for 1 or 2 more years, he stayed for at least 3 years and up to 9 years. Now here's the thing. Some of us would say that things are just getting really bad for Yusuf, right? For Joseph. But here's the thing, let me ask you a question. Let's assume that Yusuf was set free, right? Let's talk about the alternative story, right? Let's say the person who was freed mentioned Yusuf to his master, and the master kind of helped him, and Yusuf was freed, right? Do you think the king would find Yusuf when he needed him? No. Because Yusuf, by then, he would have been gone, right? Yusuf, there's no way Yusuf was going to plan to stay in that city, right? Because, I mean, again, what happened to him was not the best thing. If he was to be freed, and if he was freed, he would have left, and the king would not find him. So again, what seemed to be something really bad, it was actually something that was well planned, and it had to happen. So when the king had the dream, Yusuf was found exactly where he was left. So he can serve the purpose that he needed to serve, and that was the one thing that saved humanity, right? So we know years passed, Yusuf is in the prison, the other person is enjoying life, and then the king has a dream, right? And the king has a dream of 7 skinny cows eating the fat ones, and 7 of the ears of wheat, 7 green ones and 7 very dry. And people told him, it's just a dream. It's no biggie. Don't worry about it. It's just one of those dreams. It's not a big deal. That's when the moment came when that person who was freed, he remembered. Said, oh, hold on a second. There is a person called Yusuf, and all I'm telling you, when he gives you the interpretation, it will come true. And he said, send me to him. Right? Now here's the thing. I want you to listen to this. This is the moment for Yusuf. Remember, quote unquote, the mistake that Yusuf did? First, he didn't ask for his freedom. He gave the interpretations, and the guy did what? Walked away, right? Right? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? Now Yusuf is dealing with the same person now who promised that he's going to tell his master about Yusuf, right? If it was any one of us, right, we would say, no, man, I'm sorry. You did not do me right last time. I want my freedom, because now he's the king, right? It's like, if it was one of us, what would we have done? We would say, no, freedom first, and then we'll talk about the dreams, right? But what did Yusuf do? Did he do that? Did he say no? Right? He gave them their interpretation of the dream. He served. Meaning, if you are treated unfairly or unjustly, does it give you the right to withhold something that you should share? No, right? Because Yusuf, again, up to this point, he was in prison unjustly. All these years lost from his life unjustly. But Yusuf, he understood that now what he's doing, he's saving humanity, right? He's saving humanity. Some of us, we get so consumed with what we see as injustice that we do injustice to others and we feel that it's justice, it's fair, right? Well, no one cared about me when I was in prison. Right? I was invisible to these people, right? Let them be. Why should I care about them, right? And even more, that guy, I told him, mention me to your master and you know my story, right? I was sent to prison unfairly, and now you're coming again to ask me for help after what you did to me, right? And we would feel it's fair. Like, it's fair, right? But Yusuf told them. He told them that you are going to have 7 years of bounty and a lot of harvest, but right after that, you're going to have 7 years of drought. And he said, what you have harvested from the first 7, use some of it during the second set of 7, but save some. Because after that, the 8th year, that is going to be the most difficult year. And here's the thing. As we say, Yusuf, like the interpretation of his dream, that was the weapon for the king. I mean, that's what really got people saved. Not only the people in that kingdom, but people from outside, right? Including the family of Yusuf. But of course, Yusuf, and we're going to come to one point here, Yusuf, when he gives that interpretation, right, the king says, oh, I want that guy, right? I mean, again, remember, even though you might have been treated unfairly, keep your character. People will recognize your character. People will recognize who you are. Just stay true to yourself. Stay true to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects you to be, right? So Yusuf, does he just walk out of prison when the king wants him? I mean, he could have said, listen, we went through court, and they, even though the evidence proved that I was right, or I was the victim, they sent me to prison, so forget about justice, right? He could have said that. Again, another lesson. Because sometimes we give up to the point that we say, and we say this a lot, life is unjust, right? So there's no system that we should check ourselves against. But Yusuf refused to leave prison. And he said only one condition, that I will actually leave prison. He said, I have to have my name cleared. I cannot leave prison with this stain on me, right? I have to clear my name, right? And that's when they reopened the case. And I'm sure you have heard cases here in this country, right? People are thrown into prison for decades. You're talking about decades, right? And then towards the end of their life, they're in the 60s, 70s, they reopen the case only to prove that that person is innocent. This is not something new. Yusuf actually said, I am not going to leave prison until my name is cleared. Did he get his name cleared? Absolutely. Now, here's the thing. Does Yusuf say, okay, see ya. I've had enough from this town. I don't care about you guys. You're just crazy bunch of people that you're just throwing people into prison. He could have said that, right? But Yusuf understood the system was not fair. I want you to understand this. The system was not run right. A lot of us, what do? We complain, right? We complain about everything. Why don't you go to that masjid? I don't know, man, the people who run the masjid, I don't like them. Why don't you go to that center? Man, I don't know. Why don't you volunteer? I don't like those people, right? Yusuf understood. The person who sent him to prison was a corrupt person, right? So Yusuf went to the king, and he understood that he has qualification. He has something, Yusuf himself, he has something that God blessed him with, and people needed it. You understand that? If Yusuf left, I want you to think, if Yusuf left, right, and the corrupt minister stayed in his place, do you think people would have been saved? First of all, that minister would take care of his family, friends, and right his inner circle. And when things get tougher and tougher, He might be asking for a bribe so he can grow his wealth. We have that, right? Alhamdulillah, we have it all over the world, right? But Yusuf, he went to the king and he said, let me be the minister who takes care of all of these things, right? When we collect the crops and we divide them, I want to be the one leading that because we need someone who is Ameen, right? And he said, I have this quality. Now here's the thing. The Prophet ﷺ taught us something. He said, the one who eagerly looks for a position, God will burden that person with that position. You understand that? Meaning, if you're a person who looks for authority, right? I want to be called, such and such. I want to be the leader of, this organization. If you're doing it because you want to be known, that will be the heaviest burden, and God will hold you accountable on the day of judgment. The scholars, they say though, it is your responsibility. If you have certain qualifications and if that position is given to somebody else, harm will be brought upon people, then it is an obligation for you to take on that responsibility. Where do they learn that from? Yusuf alayhi salam. Again, these stories are not for the sake of storytelling, right? On the surface, if you listen to what Yusuf said, you're like, whoa. No. He said, give me this position, and he mentions the quality. He says, I am a trustworthy person. I am a person who will take care of this and take care of people. So he does become what? The minister who takes care of these things, right? They had, alhamdulillah, great 7 years. Life is beautiful. Everyone is enjoying it, right? And then the difficult 7 years kicked in, right? And then the 1 year that people from all over that area would come to that one place, that one central place, right? To be saved, that year came. And here's one thing. And I mentioned this before. Allah did not create any one of us for ourselves. And remember we mentioned this before? God did not create you for yourself. He created you for a greater purpose. You see how Yusuf understood that? All the difficulties that he actually went through just was something that he knew was preparing him so he can serve humanity. And that's exactly what he did. Now, Yusuf is of a position now. He's a responsible person, right? Now his own family is going through the struggle, just like everybody else, right? Now, the brothers, just like everybody else, they had to go, they had to travel, they had to leave the village and go seek provision because, their fields are dry. It's drought. There's no food. They cannot harvest. They could not even plant, let alone harvest. So they knew that they had to go and just like everybody else, ask for help. Now, when they went to ask, they would mention the number of people in their families, right? Actually, we have this system here, by the way. I want you to understand, things that happened in the past, we have them now, but especially in the secular society that we have, it's like, oh, we came up with it. No, you didn't come up with it. This is in the history. So during the time of Yusuf, right, you go in, and as you're asking for help, they will ask you for the number of people that you have in your family, right? Who are we feeding, right? You don't have to bring the entire family with you, but you're going to tell them, we have this and this. Now, when they mention, now, his brothers, when they enter, who recognizes who? He recognized them. Did they recognize him? Remember what I told you before? He had to be young enough that when he becomes of age, they would not recognize him. No way. But they were old enough that even though they got older, he still recognized them. You see now, the time that he was put in the well, that was the perfect timing. He had to be at that age, and they had to be at that age. So he would recognize them on the day they came, and they would still not recognize him, right? So they mentioned that they have, obviously the father and, the mothers and the brother. So now he knows that he has a younger brother. But does he say anything to them? Of course he doesn't. So he says, you know what? You have to bring your brother. If you want provision, you have to bring your brother. If he's able to come, he has to come. I understand your father is old, and you're not going to have your mothers obviously travel with you, but I want your brother to come, right? And they go back to their father and they said, listen, this is the situation that we have. And by the way, he honored them, but they don't mention that to the father because Yusuf wa akhuhu. Early on, the jealousy was clearly mentioned that it's the Yusuf and the brother we are jealous of, right? The jealousy continued, right? Even at a much older age, they still have the jealousy, right? So the father says, I'm just concerned that you might, same thing will happen, right? To Benjamin that happened to Yusuf. They said, now we'll give you a promise from Allah. You see now how he's changing? He said, no, now I want you to swear to God. I don't want you to just give me that, empty promise. Now God is a witness between me and you with this promise, right? So they said, okay, we'll give you that promise, right? Because remember, they had no intention of harming the younger brother, right? But the father was still concerned, right? So they go back, and Yusuf sees his brother and recognizes him, right? Now, the way they would spend the night, they would give him rooms where they have to be like in pairs, like two brothers per room. Remember, Yusuf has how many brothers? 11. So one has to be left by himself. And he intentionally gave all of them rooms, and Benjamin was left by himself. That was the moment Yusuf approached Benjamin. He said, I am your brother. I am the brother from those, a long time ago, right? I'm still alive, right? And, they catch up on things a little bit. And he tells him, he's like, don't worry, I have a plan, right? So now, before the brothers because they got accused of stealing, right? Because he wanted to keep his brother with him, right? But he told him ahead of time. He said, I have a plan, So Benjamin knew, right? But the other brothers did not know. So Yusuf, the next day, he gives them the provision that they came for, right? And he sends them off. Right? And then a caller calls, and he said, you stole, right? Scholars say they stole the measuring cup, right? And they said, there's no way we stole. Because remember, he put it, right? He put it in the mata' or the stuff that Benjamin had, right? Each person had, their own right. So they put that container or that cup in the measuring cup in the belongings of Benjamin. And when they started searching, they started with everybody. They started with all of them. Benjamin was left last. Obviously, it was all planned, right? And they took it out from the belongings of Benjamin. They said, oh, and look what they said. They said, if he stole, his brother also stole. Look, subhanAllah, what they did to Yusuf, and still, the jealousy was still burning, because they didn't know that Yusuf is still alive, right? As far as they're concerned, he's gone. Where is he? They do not know. But they still had it. They always associated Benjamin to his brother Yusuf, and they were no good. We don't like them, right? And Yusuf, in the scholars, they say, like within himself, he did not show it to them. He said, "You're liars." Right? He said, "You are the bad ones," but he didn't say it out loud, right? And then they said, "Listen, can you please take any one of us?" Because they knew that this time they promised the father that they are going to bring Benjamin back. So now all of them, they were willing to be kind of like, subbed for the younger brother. They said, "No, I'm not going to do that. He stole, and he's the one that we have to keep. We're not keeping any one of you." And he kept him. And the older one, the eldest one, he said, "You know what? This is not going to work. We promised our father, and here we are, we're breaking our promise. This is the second time." He said, "I'm going to stay back. Unless Allah forgives me, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala passes his judgment on me, or my father forgives me." They go back to the father. "Where is the younger brother? This is what happened." And they said, "You know what? Even ask the people, right? It's not us. He did it to himself." Now here's the thing. Just for the sake of time. Sometimes a lot of things happen to us. Now we're talking about the father. A lot of things happen to us that we give up hope when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help, right? It's like, this didn't happen the way I wanted. That didn't happen the way I wanted. There's no way things will take a different turn. There's no way that things will look better for me. But look at him. When he sends them back out, what does he say to them? Does he say, go and find your younger brother, or does he say, just give it a shot? What does he say? What does he ask him to look for? Who are they looking for now? Is it just the younger brother or who? Both. You know how many years Yusuf was gone? In one of the narrations, 30, in one, 40. Like, he was gone for a very, very long time. Obviously, Yaqub is a prophet, but again, it's a lesson for us to learn. Don't give up hope. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will deliver things when you least expect them. And obviously they go back. And Yusuf, at that time, what does he do? He reveals to them his identity. Right? He tells them that I am your brother Yusuf. One point that actually I forgot to mention. When they first put him in the well, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell Yusuf? A time will come when you will remind them of this, and they're oblivious to it. When they put him in the well, they put him and they walked away, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Yusuf, right, that a time will come when you will remind them about this incident. But then, they will be oblivious. And actually, that was one of the signs that it's going to be a long time before you actually get to remind them, right? Because it has to take them a long time before they become oblivious to what happened, right? And subhanAllah, time came as he is, the minister, and they're the ones asking for help, and he reminded them. See how now the dream, it's going to be kind of like, coming to fruition. But things are actually unfolding on reverse. He saw the dream first, and then he was thrown into the well next, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him in the well that you're going to tell them what they did to you. In the dream, they will prostrate to him. So things are actually kind of like unfolding exactly on reverse. Kind of like, first, last, right? So he tells them, I am Yusuf, and this is my brother, Binyamin. One of the actually things that happen in the story that as a father, it's something that I always tell fathers to read this part. Now, does Yusuf go back to his father? Initially, does he go back to him? Like, does he say, oh, let's all go back to the village? No. What does he send with them? A shirt. How long has it been since Yaqub actually saw or smelled Yusuf? We said at least about 30 to 40 years, right? When they arrived, now remember, when he became sad, what did he lose? His eyesight, right? When he was weeping and crying because of the loss of his two sons, he lost his eyes, he became blind, right? Yusuf sends his shirt, right? What does the father say? He's blind. What does he say? What did he find? What did he sense? The smell of Yusuf alayhi salam. Yes, there is that hadith, and a lot of times, unfortunately, fathers, they count on that hadith not to be involved or not to be as loving, of their children. Of course, Jannah is tahta aqdam al-ummahat. We know that. There's a hadith of taking care of your mother and all that. But look at the father of Yusuf. After decades, he still picked up on the scent of his son, who was actually still a young boy. That is a bond between a father and a son. How many of us can actually relate to that? As like that connection that Yaqub had with his son Yusuf, that after decades, he still picked the scent. His son is not there. A lot of people say, oh, I can recognize the voice, or I could see the feature. No, he was blind. There was no voice. The only thing, and I want you to think about this. When they arrived, I want you to really think about this. When they arrived, back in the days, they didn't have cars. You guys know that, right? So I don't know how many of you guys have dealt with animals and all that. Do animals stink? They have smell, right? They have distinct smell. From all of that, right? From the busyness of all of that, the caravan just came, and he picked on the scent. He said, I find the smell of Yusuf in them, right? And of course, they put the shirt on his face, and his eyesight comes back. And Yusuf obviously told them, bring everyone, back. And they did. They brought the entire family back, and that's when the dream of Yusuf alayhi salam came to be true. But think about it. Years and decades that Yusuf alayhi salam, between when he was a child and he saw that dream, with all the tests and trials and tribulations that he had to go through, for the parents, the father and the mother, and the 11 siblings to prostrate to Yusuf alayhi salam out of respect, of course. It was not an act of worship. I don't want anyone to think that was not an act of worship. Just like when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the angels to prostrate to Adam, it was not an act of worship. It was an honor, exactly, to honor him. Exactly, it's exactly what happened with Yusuf. But to conclude, by the way, the two victims here that were mentioned in the story were Yusuf and the father, right? They both forgave and they both asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive the transgressors, right? How many of us can actually do that, right? To forgive our transgressors. Again, it's difficult. It's very difficult. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says when He speaks about sabr. If you're not patient, you cannot forgive. If you're not patient, you cannot forgive. If you truly want to know if you're a patient person, see what's the end result, right? Yeah. And qadimin al-ghayb. Qadim al-ghayb is someone who actually can get their right back, but they choose not to, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So because you are more concerned about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala thinks of you than you trying to think that, I'm going to get my right back, or, they did this to me, so I have to do this to them. So both, they forgave, and the story will be told until the day of judgment of how Yusuf alayhi salam had to go through all of these difficulties, and he had all the reasons to go astray. He had all the reasons to give up. He had all the reasons according to us, not according to Allah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us His promise is going to be fulfilled. Meaning, according to our measurement, he had all the reasons. He was left with no one could actually call him out and say, why did you do that? But he was only answering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He knew that his relationship was with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why his story is going to be told until the day of judgment. And like I mentioned, we never tell stories for the sake of storytelling. We'll try to conclude because it is almost time for us to pray Maghrib. Maybe we're not going to have everyone to share one or two lessons that they learned, but let's try to see maybe like a couple of us. Let's try to start with Brother Eric. One thing that you learned, and maybe like one or two of our young brothers, and then we'll go to the sisters and we'll wrap up, inshallah.
Okay, I'd say one thing I learned from this story would be the importance of patience through hardship. Of course, the father had patience with his
Children,
and through that patience, he ended up finding his closest son.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, yeah. My young brothers would like to go. Yes, sir. If we'll come back to you. Yes, sir.
I learned that when you're going through hardship, you should never forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Exactly. When you're going through hardship, never forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, sir.
Just because you're going through a hard time doesn't necessarily mean it's for the worst. It could be a precursor to something that catalyzes your future.
Thank you.
When you said when the bird gets stuck in the mud, the person that pulls him out could be the person that's trying to harm him.
Absolutely, absolutely. I really love the reflection of the youngsters, mashallah. I really, we'll go for one more. Yes, sir.
Never even give up hope, no matter how hard you try. If you fail.
Mashallah, I really love their reflections, mashallah. Did you remember? Okay, go ahead. For the what?
You didn't know Yusuf went to prison.
Yes, he did. Yusuf went to prison. Yes. Let's see if maybe one or two of our sisters, anyone?
Relationship of father and son.
The relationship between father and son. Yes, that's. I pray that fathers will really work on that. This is one of the most beautiful stories. When it comes to the bond of the father and the son, of Yusuf and his father. And obviously, we know the story from Ibrahim and Ismail, alayhi salam, when we mentioned that in the past, inshallah. Anybody else?
I think the biggest lesson is that the human being is both Yusuf and his father can be that forgiving.
Yes. And forgiving is very difficult. Yeah.
You should learn it, adopt it, and make sure.
Yes, live it.
If you don't do that, then the full story is that they
Exactly. Then there is no purpose, right? To reciting or memorizing or reading the story. Yes. Yes.
effectively follow it.
Yes. And I pray may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us like that. Like you said earlier, it is not an easy thing. That's why not everyone is patient. That's why not everyone is forgiving. And that's why the reward for it, especially those who are patient. Jannah bighayri hisab.
The chef, if you can comment, I don't think you Sayyidina Yusuf asked Allah to go to prison, but the lady had power over him.
Yes.
She said,
But when he said,
what is Jannah?
there's, yeah.
But he said, even prison is bad, but it's better option.
So let me tell you that. So if you, and I'll tell you why some of the scholars, they say, again, that's why I said I don't want you to think of it as something authentic or anything, but some scholars with their ijtihad, Musa alayhi salam, when Fir'aun, what did he do? What was his decision with the children of Israel, the newborns? To kill them all, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the baby to the killer to be raised by the killer. So because in Yusuf, the power was not in the lady's hand. That's why I said scholars, right? Again, if you remember, I was very cautious when I mentioned that. That's why I said when you make dua, always make dua for the best, right? That's why I said it's not a hadith, it's just ijtihad of some scholars. And they use actually the story of Musa, right? Where Fir'aun, literally the reason his mother put him in Filyam, because to save him, because Fir'aun was coming to his house to kill him. But subhanAllah, Allah is showing us his power. And of course, we're going to talk about this story, inshallah. This is going to be our next story for Among the Living. Musa literally was delivered by Allah to the house of Fir'aun to be raised by Fir'aun himself and his wife. And that's why I said, so the power was not in the woman's hand. That's why I said, yeah. Allah inshallah, we will conclude because it's long time, inshallah. And our next story, inshallah, will be the story of Musa alayhi salam, the living, inshallah. Subhanahu wa ta'ala.